The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're very happy you could join us. My name is Brianna Humphreys, and I'm the Marketing Manager for K-12 Education Products here at Brooks Publishing. Before we get started today, I just want to cover a few brief housekeeping items. You will be muted for the webinar, but if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them into the question box. We will be taking these questions after the presentation during the Q&A portion of our webinar. For the presentation, you might want to minimize the GoToWebinar bar on your monitor so you can see more of your screen. You can do that by clicking the orange button with the arrow at the top corner of your control bar. If you need to enlarge the bar again to ask a question, you can just click that orange button again. If you have any audio issues at any point, you can switch to phone by clicking in the audio section of the webinar panel and using the dial-in information provided. Also, we will be recording today's webinar, so everyone who registered for today's event will receive a link to the recording and a follow-up email tomorrow. I am happy to announce that Brooks will be giving away 3 copies of Nicole Eredics' book, Inclusion in Action, today. So winners will be randomly selected from our live attendees and notified by email after the webinar. If you want to increase your chances, be sure to submit your questions throughout the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. We're very lucky to have Nicole Eredics here with us today. Nicole is an educator who advocates for the inclusion of students with disabilities in the general education classroom. She draws upon her years of experience as a full inclusion teacher to write, speak, and consult on the topic of inclusive education to various local and national organizations. Nicole uses her unique insight and knowledge to provide practical strategies for fully including and instructing students of all abilities in the classroom. You can follow Nicole online through her popular blog, The Inclusive Class. So without further ado, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, and hello everyone. I hope you're having a great afternoon. Today I am talking about making curriculum modifications in minutes. And the reason I'm doing that is because there are so many of our students in our schools right now who are at school but not necessarily experiencing the full school experience. So, for example, I want you to imagine, we've all seen this graphic before, but I want you to imagine being at this baseball game here on the left-hand side of the graphic and being the little boy in the blue shirt, or girl in the blue shirt, who cannot see over the fence to see the game. So here he is, he's been invited to this game, which is exciting, and his friends can see, and the crowd can see, but he can't see. And so I want you to try and think about what that would feel like if you're at this, exciting event, but yet your experience at the event is somewhat limited. You might also try imagining going to Disneyland, for example, and getting there and being told that the rides are closed for maintenance all day. So here you are at this world famous amusement park, and yet you can't fully experience all that the park has to offer. So when we talk about inclusion in schools, we want to make sure, and we do a fairly good job of including our kids in the general sort of aspect of school life. When it comes to, going to, school performances, or, participating in some type of school-wide activity, I think we generally do a good job of including most of our kids, if not all. When it comes to the classroom, I think we also are starting to do a better job of including our kids at the classroom level, whether it's participating in, and some sort of, class activity, or some sort of, watching a video with the class or listening to a story with the class. I think for the most part, most of our kids are getting included in that aspect. However, when it comes to the curriculum, that's when I feel a lot of teachers struggle to fully include all of their students, and in particular, those students who have intellectual disabilities or disabilities that limit their understanding of the curriculum that their same age peers would experience. So when we talk about full inclusion and inclusion in the school system, we want to make sure that we're not only including our kids at the school level, at the classroom level, but at the curriculum level. Because if they're not being included in the curriculum, then they are at school having this school experience, but not participating in the school experience, not learning from the curriculum that their same age peers have. And curriculum modifications actually have been identified as absolutely critical if students with disabilities are to achieve access and to make progress in the general education curriculum. So it's essential, and it's been identified by researchers, that these curriculum modifications must be made in order to fully include our students with disabilities. So that's what we are talking about today. I'm just going to do a quick review of what curriculum modifications are before I get into some strategies. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, curriculum modifications are for students who are not working at grade level. So they are working at a different level than their same age peers. Curriculum modifications are substitutions, deletions, and additions to the curriculum. So the curriculum is fundamentally changed. Unlike curriculum accommodations, which do not change the curriculum, it only allows greater access to the curriculum. Curriculum modifications actually significantly change the curriculum that the child is going to learn from. Curricular modifications therefore alter the learning outcomes. So the learning goals of the student have been altered and are changed. As well, curriculum modifications involve grading, a different type of grading or credit system. So they're not getting graded the exact same way that their peers would be graded on, or to the exact same standards that their peers would be graded on. I mean, for example, you can use the same type of rubric or the same type of overall kind of assessment with your student with curriculum modifications, but they're going to be graded on a different set of standards. And finally, of course, curriculum modifications need to be and are recorded in the student's learning plan, which is usually the individual education plan. So because that the process of making curriculum modifications is a very significant one and can alter the outcome of the student at graduation. So depending on what type of graduation status the student has will depend on the type of curriculum that they've been learning from through their school years. So that's just a bit of background on what curriculum modifications are, so we all know what we're talking about here. Now, how do we modify curriculum? There are three very simple steps to modifying curriculum, and it's just knowing the process and getting some ideas and some strategies that will basically, take you on your way and help you modify curriculum with ease. So here they are. So the first one is to determine the curriculum that will be used. And of course, you're going to get that from the IEP goals, the interests, and the abilities of the student. And here's just an example of some goals that you might find on an IEP or that the school-based team comes up with. You can see on the left are, and many states do have this, they have the the general education Common Core curriculum standards or their state standards, and then you have the standards for students with disabilities. So it's a simplified standard or simplified goal. So those are typically the goals that a teacher is looking to work with and to help teach the student. The second step is to determine how the curriculum will be accessed. So what changes do we need to make to the lesson? There are several ways in which we can change curriculum, and I'm going to go through those right now. We can change the content, we can change the conceptual difficulty, we can change the educational goals, and we can change the instructional method. So we want to look at the class lesson, the class curriculum, and we want to try and figure out what it is that we can make changes to that will allow for the student to access that material and achieve that material, to make progress and to meet the learning goals that we've set out for them, or that has been set out for them. So what we do then is we look at this, here's an example of what I just said. Here is a class lesson. So we're asking ourselves, is it too complex? Do I need to make some changes to the learning outcomes? Do I need to change the content? Or do I need to alter the educational goals and teach it another way? And finally, once we've figured out what needs to be changed with the material, then we need to decide how we can change it. So we need to figure out how we can make it accessible and achievable. And we use research-based instructional strategies to do that. And there are many different strategies, and most teachers know these strategies already. It's just about applying them to the curriculum so that it can be modified for the student who is on the modified curriculum. And here are some strategies. So if the lesson has been determined to be too complex, then what we can do is we can alter the conceptual difficulty of it. So that means we change the difficulty level of the lesson. For example, the teacher can look at either taking away some of the work or some of the requirements of the lesson. For example, you can see on the left-hand side, this is just a very simple example. It's a picture of a dog. The class has been asked to label the parts of the dog. Well, on the modified assignment, the teacher has added in some of the words as a word bank underneath. So that ability for the students in the general education program to come up with the word on their own and to print it on their own has been taken away, and the activity has been simplified by giving the student on the modified program a word bank to choose their words from and to copy the correct spelling from. And the teacher has already put in 2 of those labels. So by deduction, the student has to pick the last label to apply. Here's another example of a simplified lesson where the content has been broken down into yes and no questions. So the student is not working with the same level of text as the rest of the class or the same level of concepts, but it has been broken down into a more simplified version so that they still understand and achieve the curriculum. And in this one, this is an example of, on the left-hand side is a lesson about pyramids, and the class is reading and discussing the pyramids, whereas the student on the modified program to the right is making a chart of things that they know about. Sorry, that wasn't about pyramids. Yes, pyramids. The student on the right is making a chart of Egypt, a web of all the things that they know about Egypt. So you're taking the same type of theme, the same content, and you're just breaking it down into something that's more achievable. Now, if the teacher finds that the material is the goal, or sort of the learning outcomes of the material is too difficult for the student and needs to be simplified, then the teacher can look at altering the learning outcomes or altering the educational goals of the material. So that means to change the learning outcomes of the lesson. So the student still gets relatively the same lesson as the rest of the class, but it's been changed to suit their own personal learning goals. So on this example, you can see that the rest of the class is learning how to multiply, whereas the student who's on the modified program is learning number recognition, has been asked to identify numbers on the page that the rest of the class has received. Here's another example of a typical read and response type assignment that a general education class might get, or this one's related to a novel called Stone Fox, where the kids read the question and answer it. Whereas the student on the modified program is working on words related to the novel. So they're still participating in the reading of the novel and the discussion of the novel, but they're being asked to identify words that are related to the novel as opposed to a more in-depth comprehension activity. Next is an example again of altering the learning goals, and this is one where this is a spelling list for a grade 5 class, and the student who is on the modified program has been asked to learn how to spell smaller words that are inside the larger words. So the student is still getting the same looking list as what the rest of the class is. However, their goal or their outcome is to learn only part of that word, not all of it. So you can see on the left is the on the left and the right is how we've chosen those smaller words for the student to learn. And on this one here, you can see that we've used an app called SnapType, and we've basically changed what we've asked the student to find. So rather than shading or coloring the area of the following shapes. We've asked the student to find the circle. So SnapType is a great app. I highly recommend it. You basically take a photo of the material, and then on the actual, in your on your phone or on your laptop, you can use the editing tools in the app, and then you can type over the actual sheet or the photo and then print it off. I'm just going to move through here in the interest of time, and these examples are going to be available on in PDF through Brooks after this webinar. The next way that you can change the material is by changing the content. So if the teacher decides, you know what, this content is a little bit too complex for the student and I need to change the content, you can do that by the following. So you can change the actual topic of the lesson, but still remain in the same theme of the lesson. And a great example of that is, for example, if you have a curriculum in which you're teaching plant cells, which is common at the middle school level, rather than having the student learn different types of plant cells because it's not at their ability level, you can have them grow plants and measure them and water them and take care of them. So you're still working within the same theme of the curriculum. And in this one here that was shared to us by one of the parents on our Facebook page, it is an example of the student who is learning different parts of the body. So as opposed to the rest of the class who might be learning more in-depth parts of the body, cell structures, body systems, this student on the modified program is learning the definition of that part of the body as well as its function at a more at a different level than what the other kids are doing. So, but still participating, which is the goal. And then finally, the teacher can say, well, you know what, should I be just presenting this material in a different way? It might be a little bit too complex and we need to change the learning outcomes, change some goals, but should I also just present it in a different way that might be more accessible and achievable for my student? And if a teacher decides to do that, then they can change the way they present the material. And that might look like this, for example. This is a high school example sent to us by Megan Gross, a teacher here in California, and she had her students learn or read Romeo and Juliet, and then she had them follow up with a visual activity, an art activity where the students colored in and wrote a sentence about what they're learning. So again, I'm just going to move through these examples in the interest of time. Here are a few resources for you to help make your modifications to the curriculum that I highly recommend. You can go to paraeducate.com. She's written a lot of books about different aspects of the curriculum with modifications. The Sherlock Center is another great resource where they have modified books so that students can read along with the class. Austin and Lily is a great site with already modified materials that you can purchase, and there are some free for download. Lessonpicks.com has all sorts of clip art. Litcharts.com, highly recommend. It is a great site for simplifying novels and poetry, and it really just breaks it down and makes it a lot easier to understand. I would have loved to have lit charts when I was in high school. And SnapType, I talked about that. There's a online repository binder that I've created that has pre-made modified lessons for students, and you can access it at bit.ly/modified lessons. And there are a lot of modified lessons in there that people have contributed that they've used. Also, there's my book, Inclusion in Action, which has 40 different ways to change curriculum to make it more achievable for students. And thank you. I just, hopefully you were able to catch some of that. If not, it will be available again, like I said, as PDF through Brooks, and you'll be able to see the slides in greater detail. So thank you very much for listening. And I believe we are moving on to questions now.
Yes, thanks, Nicole. That was a great presentation. We're getting lots of questions, so it's time to jump right in. So
Okay.
One of the first questions we've received today is if you could talk a little bit more about how modifications differ from accommodations.
Certainly, yeah, that's something I didn't have a lot of time to do. So accommodations are ways of helping kids access the curriculum. So they already know the material, they just need help getting to it. So for example, people who need eyeglasses, that's an accommodation. So they can understand the material and they can understand the grade level content. They just need help seeing it. So that's why they wear eyeglasses. Or perhaps students get distracted a little bit easier. So we change the location of where they're sitting so that they are not distracted. So it doesn't change, and it doesn't involve changing what the student is expected to learn. It doesn't change what the learning outcomes are or what they're being asked to do, but it just helps the student get to that material a little bit easier.
Great.
And if there are, oh, sorry. If you have any more questions about accommodations, you can have a look at my website or you can email me and I'll answer those for you.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Another question we've received is if you have any suggestions on how to increase inclusion overall in schools. The speaker notes that they have a lot of self-contained classrooms in their school.
Yeah, it's a school-wide process. I'm not going to lie. It's something that has to happen at various levels, beginning with the administration, having some conversations about gradually increasing the time that the students who are in the self-contained classrooms, having them participate, or perhaps in a lesson or two in a general education classroom. Of course, the parents have to be on board with that. The special education teacher has to be on board with that. The classroom teacher needs to know how to facilitate the inclusion in the activity, and it's definitely something that has to require the effort of the school-based team and the parents. And so, like I said, just starting with, for example, an art lesson or a music lesson or something that the student is interested in, like a science activity, or having them come in for a social studies lesson. So there's so many great books too that are written on about facilitating more inclusion in schools, that I highly recommend. Books that are published by Brooks Publishing that talk about ways for students to be more included at the school level. So I recommend going onto the Brooks website and checking out those books as well. So, and then of course you can go on my website too.
Great. Thanks for that little plug, Nicole. That we do have lots of resources, including your book, that are really helpful for a lot of people. Another person has asked, how can you go about making modifications if an IEP might not yet be in place?
Oh, okay. So an IEP does have to be in place before you make the modifications, because modifications can change because you're teaching the student an entirely different curriculum or parts of the curriculum, and you're making some really significant changes to what they're learning. It is a legal process because it can affect whether or not the student graduates with, with or without a diploma. So it is a legal, it is a process that has to be done and put in place in an individual education plan before you can start making the modifications. And it has to be, in agreement with the family and the school-based team. So.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Another question we've received is, what is your recommendation for educating the rest of the class on the needs of children without going against any privacy issues?
Oh, that's a great question. So there has to be a lot of conversation, obviously. There are a lot of great books that you can use to introduce, how to, I think really actually, I'm going to backtrack here. Start with empathy. Start by teaching empathy and tolerance and understanding with your students, and build those skills through books and activities and stories. You can also, like you said, then access books that relate to students with specific disabilities, not in your class, but in the book, of course, and have conversations about, what's it like, what could that look like. You can bring in guest speakers. You can look at different types of programs that where kids, now I wouldn't, some people have varying opinions of this, but there are ways in which students can experience what it would be like to have a certain disability. That, I wouldn't necessarily jump to that one right away, but it's definitely available. So it's just about demystifying and getting kids used to that, showing, offering a lot of visuals, a lot of media, multimedia, and discussion around just people who have differences, and that it's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't make it us not normal. It just, everybody is different and everybody learns in different ways. And so it's just really broadening that, or opening up that conversation that, everybody has these unique differences, and we're all, we all have gifts to offer and strengths to offer. And just starting with that kind of general, approach can really start to bring kids around to just understanding that we're all different, and it doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
Thank you for that. In the interest of time, I think we might have time for maybe 2 more questions today before we wrap
Sure.
up. So another question that's come in is, can curriculum modifications be implemented at all grade levels? And for example, they've noted abstract topics like algebra, quadratic equations, and some more abstract themes.
Yeah. So I have seen modifications at the high school level in algebra and, sort of the higher level math. And I'm not an expert at that curriculum. My expertise is more in the elementary to middle school curriculum area. But really what you're doing is you're taking what the student is learning. So you're not asking the student to learn material at necessarily that level, right? So if this class is working on algebraic skills, you need to look at what is the student capable of doing within that situation. Do you need them to learn how to multiply or add or recognize numbers? So you're not necessarily asking the student to come up and meet that level of what the other kids are doing. This is why it's a modified program. You're asking them to work at their own ability level within that setting. So, the class is obviously working with numbers. So what kind of goals does that student have that relates to numbers that they can be working on in that setting? Now I believe there is, Lisa Diker. She has a lot of expertise at modifying curriculum at the high school level. So if you want to check out her resources, she has some great ideas for modifications and inclusion.
Great, thank you for that. The last question that we have time for today is if you've had any recommendations or tips about the best ways to use paraeducators to assist with modifications.
Yeah, so paraeducators are so helpful, and especially when you establish a really positive working relationship with them. Some of the ways that you can do is I wouldn't expect them to make all the modifications. If that's something that they want to help with, that's great. But really, in the end, it's your responsibility as the classroom teacher to deliver the curriculum and to make the modifications. So, just asking the paraeducator what they're comfortable doing, what they know, what their knowledge base is, setting some, modeling modifications for them, giving them resources, but always just checking in with them and making sure that they're comfortable doing what they're doing. And of course, you checking in with them too, to make sure that, you're covering all the IEP goals that need to be covered, and you're covering the curriculum that is, that the rest of the class is covering, or, that you're making sure that the student is still achieving the curriculum and still experiencing the curriculum. So it's not necessarily about, asking the paraeducator to do all the modifications. It's about working as a team to create the modifications and what they're comfortable doing. Because in the end, it's really your responsibility and your overall, something that the classroom teacher needs to be making sure gets done. So.
Thank you so much for that response, Nicole. Like I said, in the interest of time, I know we want to try to finish up here in the next couple of minutes. I think we're going to wrap up the Q&A for today, but thank you so much for all
You're
your
welcome.
expertise and guidance. It was really helpful.
My pleasure.
So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I do quickly want to mention that Brooks is offering a 20% discount from now until the end of June. So if there are any additional resources that you need to stock up on, including Nicole's book or some of the other resources that might have been mentioned today, you can use the code Coffee Talk at checkout, and you can get that 20% discount on our print and ebook products. And if you're looking for more professional development opportunities over the next couple of weeks, we are continuing our coffee chat series every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So stay tuned, and you can visit the web address listed on your screen for our latest lineup and sign up for additional webinar opportunities. And if you need even more support, such as recommended reading, downloadable resources, or links to these professional development webinars, you can check out the Brooks Publishing COVID-19 resources on our website. So again, thank you very much to everyone who tuned in today to attend, and thank you so much to our speaker, Nicole Eredics, for a fantastic
Thank you for having me.
presentation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.